It's 2 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started now. I want to thank you all for coming. It's really exciting to be with you all virtually today. My name is Kira Dickey, and I'm the Market Development Manager here at Peerceptive. I'm excited to be your host today alongside my colleague, Jonathan Olshock. So before we dive in, just a couple housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, and we'll share the recording along with additional resources with everyone who registered. We're going to wrap up the content for today in about 30 minutes, but we'll stick around for further discussion at the end. So also feel free to use the chat throughout the presentation for comments or questions at any time. So here's a quick look at our agenda. First, we're going to discuss the benefits of peer assessment for biology students and instructors, and then we'll put that into context with a case study from Oregon State. Then Jonathan is going to give us a peek into actually how a lab report assignment would look in Peerceptive. And then we'll wrap up with some research coming out of the University of Manitoba. So like I mentioned earlier, we'll have some time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to put your questions or comments in the chat throughout the presentation at any time. So now we'll get started with the benefits of peer assessment. So by evaluating their peers' work, students are exposed to different perspectives as well as positive and negative examples, which reinforces their own knowledge and fosters a more comprehensive understanding of the material. So there's actually a lot of research on peer assessment that demonstrates that students learn more from giving feedback than they do when they just receive it. And this, of course, is very efficient for instructors because not only are the students actively participating and engaged in this higher quality learning, and they're learning while they're giving feedback, but the workload of giving feedback is distributed amongst the students. So it's not on only your shoulders to give feedback on every single lab report in a class of 300 students or in a fully remote course. So this is really a win-win situation for both students and instructors. So now we're going to jump into a case study from Oregon State that will kind of demonstrate what we've talked about so far. So this is Andrew Boma. He teaches over 300 students per semester. He's an associate professor of biology at Oregon State. He has a fully online course where students conduct their lab research at home. So as you can imagine, it's really logistically difficult for him to assign and grade his lab projects in this course. And there's really no time for Andrew to have the students practice their formal report writing either. So the Oregon State online program actually has a subscription with Peerceptive, so it's totally free for Andrew and his students to use the platform. So he now uses Peerceptive's peer assessment feature. This is a quote from Andrew. The metacognitive task of seeing others' work, as well as where your own paper is good and where it can be improved, is the most compelling reason to use Peerceptive. So now let's talk about how he structured the assignment and some more details about his assignment. So like I mentioned before, Andrew's students actually complete their labs at home. So at the start of the semester, they receive a packet of lettuce seeds in the mail. And then throughout the next several weeks, they measure the effects of different wavelengths of light on the plant's growth. And at the same time, they write a formal research report, which is split into 2 parts. So they get submitted separately into Peerceptive. They write the introduction and the research sections around the start of the semester, and then after the seeds have time to germinate and grow, they write the results and discussion sections. So what Andrew noticed is that students' writing improved between the second and first parts quite significantly. Also, logistically, managing all of those lab reports was a lot simpler through Peerceptive. And the students had a better understanding of what they had learned and where they have questions. So just to highlight this quote, students often note on course evaluations how valuable it was to review the work of other students. Peer review forces them to grapple with what they do understand and identify with what they don't. So now I'm actually going to pass the screen share to Jonathan, and he will demonstrate how Andrew runs his assignment in Perceptive.
Thanks, Kira. Thanks everyone for joining us today. It's great to see everybody there. And we're going to get into a little bit more detail now about how Andrew leverages Perceptive. We're not going to show his exact assignments, but we'll show a similar structure and rubric to the type of activities that he does. So first, a little bit of background on Perceptive. Perceptive is the result of about 20 years of research at the University of Pittsburgh. It was funded by the University of Pittsburgh, the National Science Foundation, and the IES. What that research has shown is that a peer assessment score, a multi-peer assessment score generated by Perceptive is as valid and more reliable than a single instructor's grade. As you can imagine, when a single human is grading a big stack of papers, there's a lot of room for error there. We can see that there's some reliability issues and some validity issues, but when you use a multi-peer process with a machine learning algorithm that can adjust scores, those grades are much more valid and reliable. Perceptive also can facilitate any type of project submission by students. What we're going to talk about today is mostly writing, since it's lab reports, but we've seen instructors have students submit videos, projects around infographics, and a lot of other different submission types. Pretty much any kind of file can be submitted for peer review. And this technology has been used in courses from as small as 15 small seminar courses for writing, all the way up to 1,000 plus students. One of those large courses will also be discussed by Kira here in a moment at the University of Manitoba, but it really doesn't matter how big the course is. And folks use this in online courses as well as in-person courses as like a homework assignment. So there's lots of different ways to leverage the system. The other thing to mention here before we jump in and I show you what these assignments look like is that Perceptive integrates with any major LMS. We use the LTI integration from One Ed Tech, and we are a certified integration, which is important to make sure that you know that when you integrate Perceptive into your LMS, it operates as intended. The students never have to create an account. It's single sign-on. No one has to leave the environment of the LMS. Everything can happen within that environment. And then grades can pass back to the grade book as well. And we can also do some other advanced integration stuff with groups, and there's some other things you can do in there. But at its core, it's single sign-on and grade passback are the real keys there. Okay, so let's get into the actual assignments here. So I'm going to open up Perceptive, and this is a perspective that we're looking at from the student's view. So I want to show what the students experience first, and then we might have some time to back out and see the instructor analytics and how the instructors set these things up. So this is a biology course that has 2 assignments in it. They're both lab report assignments, and they're both first drafts. So this might be an occasion where the students submit part 1 of their lab report with just the introduction, methods, and references. They get peer feedback on that. Then they go do the experiment. And then the next lab report is completed at the end. The next part, which is results and discussion. Then they get peer feedback on that, and then they combine the 2 and submit them for a summative grade. That's one way to run this. You could also have them resubmit the work to Perceptive for a summative peer assessed grade. There are lots of different ways to use this here. We'll see that in the example that we share later at Manitoba, for example, the TAs grade that second draft. So this gives the students an opportunity to really improve their work before it goes to that final decision by the instructor. It also saves the instructor time when they're scoring those because it's of a much better quality already. We've kind of taken care of a lot of the low-hanging fruit, if you will, that the students can take care of that on their own with the peer review. So we'll start with this first assignment, lab report 1. You'll notice that there are 3 deadlines because there are 3 different phases of the assignment, and we'll click on that assignment to see those. The first thing that the students will do is submit their work. They can do that any number of ways. We'll do that in 1 second. And then they will review a number of their peers. And then finally, during the feedback stage, they will receive the comments from their reviewers, rate how helpful they found those comments to be, and reply back. So in this case, we're doing this lab report. Actually, this student has already submitted their document and they're ready to review. So we'll just jump right into the review. The submissions can be done either by dragging and dropping files or submitting a link, or even entering text right into a text box. So it's pretty straightforward on the submission. We'll jump right into the reviewing. So we'll click Start Review 1. On the left-hand side is the lab report that's being reviewed, that I'm reviewing as the student. So you'll see that it's over here on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, we have our rubric or our prompts that will guide students to give very clear and measured responses in their peer review. If we just unleash students and say, here's a lab report, provide some feedback, students aren't, especially first and second year students, really don't have the skill set yet to be able to provide meaningful feedback in that way. So what we need to do is structure this in a very specific way so that it targets the feedback and provides a constructive exchange between the two peers. And as Kira mentioned at the top, there's so much benefit on the giving side of feedback. The providing is really where the students are learning the most. And so providing the structure that you see here is really important so that they can realize those benefits. This first prompt is what we call a rating prompt. It's where students start to provide the quantitative scoring. They're structured in this way so that students providing feedback can read the descriptions, find the one that best matches this particular work, and select it. So as they're doing this, they're actually starting to understand the expectations of a lab report more clearly. I know that the hypothesis and significance need to be stated and be clear. And we can get it very granular with these types of rating prompts. So if you were looking for even more specificity in the hypothesis, you could include that as well. So that's the first rating prompt, and then they click next. The second rating prompt is still focused on the introduction. And this time, though, it's supporting the hypothesis. So did the students support what they wrote as their hypothesis? So again, they find the description that best matches over here. We'll say that this student did 4-level work, and then they can move on to the next prompt. The next prompt that we see here is a commenting prompt. Lots of different ways to structure this. We can scaffold this out, as for different levels of skill sets. Early students, first biology course they're taking, we would definitely want a lot of scaffolding and how to structure these comments. And then maybe as you move on to the upper level courses, you can start to just be kind of more open-ended with the feedback. But we really want to structure this in a way that helps students learn how to collaborate around this particular academic skill of lab reports. So what we've done here is we've provided a little bit of scaffolding. We basically said comment on the effectiveness of the introduction section. And then we said, what are some of the strengths and what elements of the introduction could be improved? That's a very classic way to ask students to structure feedback. We could have also included an exemplar comment. I just could have pasted the text of a really solid comment here so that they have a model to use. I also could have given an outline. Here's the things that should be included in your comment back to your peer. So not only are you ensuring that they're giving good feedback to the recipient, but it's also training them on how to be good academic collaborators. So they would just type the comment here. And they can also attach this comment to a specific location in the document. So if they're commenting on this sentence, they can drop a pin there. Then when the author of this document receives it, they'll be able to scroll right to that pin and see which comments are associated with it. When you have 3 reviewers on every document and they're using this pin drop feature, it starts to create a heat map for the author of the document. When they receive it back, they see on their document, oh, there's 4 pins right on this location. That's probably an area I want to address when I do my second draft. The rest of the rubric here is pretty straightforward. It's just a sequence of ratings and comments. We do have a scientific writing rubric built into Perceptive that you can choose as a template. We also have a very active instructional support team who will meet with you individually on Zoom and walk you through how to build these rubrics, how to convert a rubric that you have into something that's more student facing, or even create new ones from scratch. All of those services are available when you use Perceptive, and Kira will get into a little bit more detail about our support team when we get to the end of the half an hour here. So this student has now completed their review, and it would be time for them to write a second review. So they can continue and write a second review, or If they've completed it, it would be time for the next step in the process. This is an optional step. We call it feedback. It is a really beneficial step according to the research, but it can be turned off or disabled for any assignment. But what the feedback stage is it's a way for students to receive their comments from their peers, rate how helpful they found it to be, and then comment back. So again, it really does a number of things. The first thing it does is it holds the reviewers accountable for giving quality comments, because we can incorporate that rating that they give into the score for the reviewer. It also ensures that the author of the document, the receiver of the review, receives and takes a look at that comment. So there's lots of research out there that students aren't even opening documents of instructor generated feedback on their work. They're just kind of phoning it in there. Well, it's part of their grade in Perceptive to open up their comments, read them, and interact with them in one way or another. So that's a really good way to get that student engagement piece here. So instead of jumping into the feedback, though, I'm going to open up that other assignment, and we're going to take a look at the results that happen at the end of this, because this is really where a lot of the power of Perceptive comes into play. This is the student results screen once they've completed a peer review assignment. I'm going to work from right to left. On the right-hand side, we have all of the peer comments that were generated on this assignment. As you can imagine, this would be very difficult to generate this amount of feedback for any particular student in a biology course, especially those large enrollment early courses. So a lot of personalized feedback over here. Also, if they click See Full Dialogue, they can see the back and forth exchange between themselves and their reviewers. And they can also see the pin drops. So in this case, there was only one pin dropped here, but they can see which comments are associated with which areas in the document. All right, so that's the commenting card. This middle card is where the average rating scores live. So this is an average score provided by my peers and adjusted for how accurate they were. I'll get into that in a moment, but that mechanism of adjusting these scores based on student accuracy is really important. It's what allows us to provide valid and reliable scores. So the students can scroll through, and each one of these lines are one of those rating prompts from the rubric. So they're the skills that you're trying to help students improve upon or assess on a lab report. You can see that the student needed some work on their hypothesis, but in general, the other sections were pretty good. And then the works cited page was, above average. So let's drill down into this introduction. They can open up the rubric here. They can see the descriptions of the higher levels of performance so that they can work towards those in the future. The other thing that you can do that's really compelling in Perceptive, especially for online courses, is you can attach help resources to each one of these skills. So if a student doesn't perform very well on their hypothesis, you can tell the system to automatically, any student who performs below the bar in that area, send them a link for that particular skill. So in this case, we sent a link on writing lab reports from Trent University, but that could be a video file, it could be a worksheet, or it could link back to the LMS. These resources are, if the instructor thinks about what would my student need if they didn't perform well in this area, that's what you can put there. For online courses, we often suggest recording a short video of the professor, even if it's just 2 or 3 minutes, saying, oh, it looks like you had looks like you need a little bit of extra work with the hypothesis. Here are 2 or 3 things that I've seen work in the past. Great way to get some face time with your students in an online course, and a really nice way to meet them where they are. As soon as they get their results, they have access to any of the resources that would be attached to any of those skills in the rubric. The last section to mention here are the grades. Now, Perceptive's grading functionality is very customizable. What you see on your screen here is the default setting, and that will generate one overall percentage grade that can get passed back automatically to your grade book if you choose. And that's made up of 4 different parts. We have the submission score, the accuracy, the helpfulness, and the task. These weightings that you see here can be adjusted as well. So for this particular assignment, the biggest part of the grade is coming from how well did this student score on their submission, on their lab report. The other 3 parts of the grade are how well they performed as a reviewer. So accuracy, helpfulness, and task is all how well they performed as a reviewer. if you're setting up this assignment, you can adjust these to match what the context is for your assignment. So for example, if this is a first draft, you might want to turn the submission grade all the way off and just increase the peer reviewing side grade. And what that message is to your students is, I'm really not that concerned at this point in the semester of the quality of your document that you submitted of your lab report. What I'm more interested in is taking the time and effort to give good peer reviews. And I know that if you do that, you'll learn more and you'll improve your work so that when we do have a submission grade, it will be much higher than this. So that's one way you can do it. And you can do the reverse also. If it's a summative assignment and you're really focused on generating that submission grade, you can turn that all the way up and turn the other parts of the grade down. So it's very customizable here. One last thing to mention before I kick it back to Kira for our second case study is that grades in Perceptive that are generated have been proven valid and reliable across many contexts, all the way from ninth grade all the way through graduate level work. That being said, instructors can get involved in this if they like. So we can generate a pure peer assessment score, or the instructor can get involved by scoring some or all of the documents. They can go through that same rubric as the students did and score each one of those elements if they like. There's also ways for them to just pull a selection of documents out of the system, score those holistically, give them a percentage grade score, and then we'll use that. If they, let's say, just do 10 documents out of 100, we'll use the scores that they gave those 10 documents, compare it to the peer scoring, and then distribute the rest of the grades in the class based on those benchmarks that the instructor set. So that's the peer review assignments from the student perspective. Again, this is one of two assignments that Dr. Bauma, types of assignments that Dr. Bauma used. These aren't his actual rubrics, but this is the types of activities that he does in his course and has seen a lot of success. He's been using Perceptive for longer than I've been at Perceptive, so at least 5 years, and has found a lot of success. So I'll kick it back to Kira now to share some other successes at the University of Manitoba.
And thanks, Jonathan. Just give me a minute here, get my screen on. There we go. Cool. So we'll spend the rest of the time here talking about some research from the University of Manitoba, like Jonathan mentioned. This is a poster session that was given by two instructors from the University of Manitoba Biological Sciences Department, Cassandra Debitz and Kevin Scott. And we're going to go through this point by point, so I'm not going to leave this up here the whole time while I talk and try to have you understand it on your own. So between the two of them, they teach over 2,000 biology students. Those are both first and third year students. And both courses follow a similar assignment structure. So to start, students draft their lab reports, and then in the first year, in the first year course, this is done individually, but in the third year course, this is done in their lab groups. But either way, students submit their drafts, and then they individually review 3 papers. So even if they submit in groups, each student completes the reviewing on their own. And then Perceptive automatically distributes, I'm sorry, I just had a brain moment. So anyway, the students individually review 3 peers, and then Perceptive consolidates the reviews that they receive, and then they actually go through and rate the helpfulness of that feedback, like Jonathan described earlier. So they actually have to think about the feedback and respond to their peers. And then once the students have reviewed the feedback they've received, they will go back through and actually revise their own work, and then submit it for a final grade by the TAs. So now let's talk about the results. So the research objectives were actually to test the reliability of the grades generated by Perceptive, and also to measure the improvements made by students between that first draft that got scored by Perceptive and the second draft that gets scored by the TAs. So now let's get into these major findings. So I'm actually going to pull these out for us, and we'll start with the findings from the third year course. So they found that there was no significant difference between the peer evaluated drafts and the control group that was only evaluated by the TAs. This demonstrates that peer scoring in Peerceptive is just as reliable as TA grading. And also, students who received feedback from both the peers and the TAs saw more improvement than just peer feedback alone. So they do recommend including TA feedback with the peer feedback if possible. And for the, for the first year students in general, they saw significant improvements in final grades. On average, there was an 18% improvement between the initial draft and the final submission. And what's really exciting is that the largest average performance gains were observed in students who initially had low draft grades. So what this means is that students who initially got an F or below 60% saw 35% improvement on the final report on average. So for example, a student who got a 55 on the first draft was able to improve up to a 90% by the final report. So depending on your school, that's going from an F to an A. And this is a quote from one of the first year students. I feel both the process of getting and giving feedback was extremely essential, as it allowed us to not only help better our own understanding, but also gave us a chance to help our peers by giving them suggestions on areas that were inaccurate or lacked information. So that wraps up the research from the poster session. So one final thing to mention, like Jonathan mentioned, if you're wondering how to get started, but you're feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this, Peerceptive support is here for you. They are available 24/7. They are US-based former educators who have certifications in instructional design, and they are more than happy to help you get started. You can meet with them by scheduling an appointment or dropping into their office hours, and they can help you add a peer learning step, peer assessment, team member evaluation, or live presentation peer assessment to any existing assignment, or they can help you create something new, completely tailored to your course. They will literally sit on Zoom and push the buttons for you if that's what you need and if that's what you want. So, and troubleshooting, always, they're there for you guys 24/7. So with that, that's the end of our presentation. I want to thank you all for coming. We really appreciate you taking time from your summer vacations and your busy start of semester season to learn about peer assessment.